Watch this. Well, we made it to Santorini. Hello from Sarajevo. Morning from Mostar.
Not a highlight.
Raining pretty hard. Day number 2 in Dubrovnik. All right, good morning from the lovely country of Switzerland. Good morning from the literal foothills of the Alps. Good morning from Strasbourg. Good morning from a cold and rainy Copenhagen, Denmark. We got here pretty late last night. It was like 11:30 when we got to our hotel, but nonetheless, we're up and at 'em this morning. It's like 9 a.m. and it's rainy, but no worries. I think that it's enough that we can manage to get around and try to do some touring without it. The Copenhagen is huge. I mean, absolutely massive. So we're gonna do, I think, 2 tours today.
Yeah, 2.
And so one of them is around the more modern area that our hotel is in. And then the other is on like a castle island or something that Kelly keeps telling me.
It's where the royal family lives even now. And it's just all the history of the royal family, how they operate, how the government operates, and kind of historical Copenhagen.
Yeah. So with that, I think we're gonna get started, although the quantity of pictures may go down as it's cold, rainy, and windy.
Although first impressions of Copenhagen is it's pretty cool. I like it.
Yeah, it is an interesting mix of old and new. You walk into a square and all of a sudden the buildings are old, and then you kind of walk on shopping streets and it's more modern and new. So yeah, initial impressions are pretty cool. But let's start the tour.
Yeah.
So we started our tour in this main square and learned just a couple things about Copenhagen. I think the first is that this city really started to come into itself around 1700. So a little bit later than a lot of the other cities, I think, in quote-unquote mainland Europe. But this square that we're in was cleverly designed that it's exactly 1 kilometer to the old city walls on all sides. So this is truly city center. Few buildings that we're going to touch on, and I think that we're going to visit like almost every building in this square. I think this is the square. The one behind us was the Queen's Palace. I guess after the king around 1700 died, she bought that and turned it into her own private residence, and now it is a art museum. And then we're going to try to do a little spin and chat here. The white building next to it, so a little bit later, like 1780, I think, this was empty plot, and so after the building, the former Queen's Palace, was turned into an art museum, there was a famous architect that was working there, and he wanted to build a piece of architecture that would inspire the rest of the city, and so he built his own palace there, which was white and black roof. And that palace kind of inspired a lot of the other architecture around the city. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how that piece carries forward. And then spinning just a little bit more behind that archway that's kind of in between us, used to be the old naval yard. So they had canals built from the ocean all the way to there. So finally wrapping up our discussion around the buildings in the square. What's over my left shoulder used to be like the old medieval part of town. But unfortunately that all burned in a fire in the 1700s, and it was replaced by the buildings that are there now. All right, so we're finally out of the square, and now we're in Nyhavn, or which is like the new town, essentially. So this used to be like a naval shipyard. There's actually a harbor right here to my right. But now it's kind of just a hot tourist center. And I think in the, 1800s they said?
Yeah.
Is essentially when it transformed from like a naval area into a pretty vibrant, like shopping, living, kind of eating area. Christmas markets are set up. It's really beautiful. The buildings, as you can see, are decorated. It's a really cool area. I really like it. All the buildings are different colors, and I think this is like one of the quintessential like Copenhagen pictures. Probably not going to be able to get it, given if I go to the other side of the river and try to take a picture, I'll just get the back of all the Christmas markets. But it's really cool to be here. The vibe's awesome. Maybe if it stops raining in the evening, we can come back.
Yeah, I'm excited to spend some time here.
Yeah. All right, let's keep moving. All right, so we're out here in the actual harbor now. And so basically this harbor used to be a lot wider than it is, but they've actually built buildings and boardwalks that are essentially hanging over the water. So the boardwalk that we're on now below us is water. But funnily enough, when Napoleon and the British were fighting in the war, the British wanted Copenhagen's fleet, or Denmark's fleet. And so they came here into the opening of the canal, which is down that way, and essentially bombed and blew up a third of the city until they surrendered their fleets. They never attacked the fleet because they needed it to fight against Napoleon, and so instead they attacked the city, left the fleet perfectly fine, and essentially Copenhagen eventually surrendered and they took the fleet. And I think Napoleon was eventually defeated, but don't quote me on that. But it's really cold, and you can tell when I turned, it's really windy. The rain's picked back up, so I think we're gonna go get some coffee and take a pause on the tour for a little bit.
I'm freezing.
Yeah. Wham Bam tour resumes. It's like 2 hours later. We did stop to get coffee, and then it started raining even harder. So I was like, let me take advantage of this time, and I went and got my hair cut. So it's much improved now.
Looking good.
A little bit better than it was before. But we came back to where we essentially dropped off on the tour, which is this balcony. It's all wood, and apparently this is the beach. So they come here to hang out when it's really warm, or maybe not so warm. But when it's rainy and this cold, they're not hanging out here. But we're going to continue the tour, so onwards. What we're learning about Copenhagen is that a lot of the streets or squares were actually filled in. So this used to be a canal behind me. Now it's a public park. But the canals were how they used to get around the city. But obviously with the invention of cars and other modes of transport, it's all filled in now, which is leading to some nice public areas. We ended up in this big square right here, what I think is called Amalienborg, which is actually a square of not 1, 2, 3, but 4 royal palaces. So I guess the old royal palace in Copenhagen burnt down in like the 1700s, and so instead of like rebuilding another one, they actually bought the 4 government buildings that face this square and started to label them all palaces. So different kings and queens lived in all of these palaces. One, I think over Kelly's head here, is the only one that's actually open to the public. No longer used as a royal residence, but the one in front of us with a flag on it, and the one to my right behind the camera is actually where the queen lives. And then her son, the prince to the throne, lives in another one. And then the third one, or the last one that I'm talking about, is only used for like government functions, and it was the most grand one of all.
I think the coolest thing about the royal family is they're known for being pretty informal. So, you know, they actually come out in public and do things. And I guess the queen used to go out shopping just along the shopping street with no guards. So that's pretty cool and pretty different from like the UK.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting too that I guess the royal line here for the oldest son, you're either named Christian or Frederick. If the current king is named Frederick, then the firstborn son is Christian, and vice versa. And the last thing there is that there's a church that was kind of partially built, and you can see here, but it's essentially it was supposed to be built of marble and like 5 times the size. But they ran out of money, so now it's built out of limestone and rather small, but it's still pretty awesome. So I think we're gonna pop in that, and then we've got another part of the tour over in like Castle Island, more or less.
Yep.
That we'll do this afternoon, maybe after a warm-up. coming across the little canal area, we're met with what is Christianbo Palace or Castle. And so it's actually been 3. This is the home of where the original King's Palace was. Before they moved to Ameliabro, that's the one with the 4 different palaces. And so this is actually burned down twice. What I'm learning is that the Danes have a little issue with fire, given half their city burned and the presidential palace burned down twice. But essentially it's now the home of the European Parliament, the Prime Minister, and the judiciary. So it's the only building anywhere where all 3 branches of government are under one building, which is kind of cool.
And you can see the 3 times it's been rebuilt. I think this middle one was the first, the chapel was part of the second, and then the darker building was part of the 3rd time that it was rebuilt and what stands now.
Yeah, and so I think they've tried to keep it on the same exact spot, so the ground that we're sitting on is where it is, and actually this palace is much smaller than the first one, which is hard to believe because it's absolutely massive. Nonetheless, we continue on. We came through the archway and stopped in this square. We learned 2 things. 1, the door behind us here goes to essentially their version of the Parliament. And 2, the royal king or queen actually is very much like the British royal king or queen, where they don't have a whole lot of power, but they're still involved in government. We learned a lot more about how the Danish government works, but there's Google if you're interested. We're going to keep moving. Continuing to move, but Christian IV built these buildings behind us. They're the actual original ones. Even though they did catch on fire, again, they were restored. And the one behind me was originally supposed to be like bannerments to protect the city, but he was like, nah, we need a brewery. So this building behind me was Christian's brewery. So we crossed over a bridge to kind of leave Christiansbro, and now we're going to go back in it. But this time we're going through the original gates to the palace, and these are actually the original walls and gates. They survived. Didn't realize I was standing in the middle of a usable road.
Yeah, there's a big sign that says no cars, but apparently that doesn't apply.
Yeah. But nonetheless, this is essentially how the palace would have looked beforehand, and now we're essentially walking back in. The sheer size of this thing, the camera I don't think is catching, but it is absolutely humongous.
Yeah, I think they said there are 10 bridges that go to the palace, and that just seems like an obnoxious number.
Yeah, but let's go in now. We've heard nothing on this tour for the past 5 minutes as we walked across the bridge and in here about how much smaller this palace is than the last one. And so you can see on the sides here, these are the original just sides, and all this was to enclose a space to ride horses. And so you can imagine just the sides here, which is an enclosure, versus what is the much smaller palace now, is quite tremendous. So pretty cool. We heard a lot more about the different kings and such, that their personalities and how they used this space, but all of it was, I think, a bit much in the details, but I think we're going to wrap this tour up here soon because Kelly and I are both really, really cold. And a good day, full day of touring kind of over. We ended up at the building behind us, which is, I think, dedicated to a famous artist here in Copenhagen. But really good. I say this every time we go to a new city and take these tours, but they are really so helpful. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it for today. It's 4 o'clock, it's getting dark. We do have some dinner reservations for tonight, but I think we're gonna go warm up and stay warm before that.